part of what's caused all this debt, and we haven't talked much about this, is just kind of the warfare state, the military industrial complex. I mean, we pissed away $6 or $7 trillion in the Middle East, trying to secure oil and just all kinds of other stupid things. And, we've got, veterans I see in the airports with limbs blown off from IEDs. And I mean, it's fucking tragic, not to mention all the foreigners we killed, many of whom were innocent. The sadly, I mean, this is another piece of the centralization. I mean, so my view, Walker's in 46, we hit peak centralization, when, I mean, World War II, because of Hitler's misbehavior, we slaughtered 50 million people, 50, 60 million people in World War II. And that was peak centralization. And now, thank God for technology. Thank God for, Shockley and the development of the microchip, and then, Fairchild and Intel and everything that came after it. Because what that has done is it's created the internet. And the internet is the biggest, most powerful decentralizing force in the universe. Because now guys like you can be equal to Walter Cronkite, what he used to be. I mean, we got our news from 3 sources when I was a kid, and it was all the news that the government wanted to let out. And of course, we all now know the government lies about just about everything. And the only way to get the truth is to find it from real truth tellers on the web. And this is why, Rogan and Tucker and a ton of other people have gotten a lot of attention, because, they represent an alternative to what we know are lies. And so this decentralization, in my view, is going to make your life and your son's life just a whole lot better, because and it's long overdue, because these big centralized organizations are so corrupt and have just gotten so broken and just don't work for us. I mean, I'm writing about this in my book. I mean, Janet Yellen getting $7 million in speaking fees. I mean, come on, that's just a fucking bribe. And it's just one of many instances. I mean, another one that I just dug up, I'd forgotten about this. You probably don't remember it. I don't know if you were paying attention at the time. But, in 2008, when the GFC happened, they created this thing called TALF, which is Troubled Asset Lending Facility. What it allowed people to do was to borrow money from the government. So Christy Mack, who was the wife of the chairman of Morgan Stanley and another Morgan Stanley executive's wife, they borrowed $220 million from the federal government non-recourse and used it to buy assets. And so, Walker, it was a no-lose for them. If those assets had gone south, they didn't owe a dime. And if those assets went up in value, which of course they did, they made millions and millions of dollars, right? Yeah, this is just the wife of the chairman of Morgan Stanley was allowed to do this. I mean, it's just one of thousands of examples. I mean, when Paulson went to Washington, D.C. to become Treasury Secretary for Bush, he had a $700 million sale of his Goldman Sachs stock, and he had to pay no tax on it, because they wrote a rule that allowed you to do that when you're going into government service. And that's why, I mean, Jamie Dimon has been rumored to maybe to go into government service, and, in large part because he could take his $1 billion of JP Morgan stock and be able to dispose of it tax-free. I mean, this is the way the system is set up. It's just so fucking broken. It's just disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting.
I did not know about the Morgan Stanley
Isn't that amazing?
thing.
Yeah,
that's
Matt
I'm gonna have to dig into that.
wrote about it. You can Google it. In fact, I encourage your listeners to Google it. Google The Real Housewives of Wall Street, Matt Taibbi. It's free. It's not behind a paywall. And read that story. It'll blow your mind. You're just like, it's just
like how is it possible that this was allowed to happen? Well, and that's the thing that the longer your eyes are open, you start to realize that these insane things that you're like, well, no, that can't possibly be true. It's like, oh no, it's true, and it's happening far more frequently than you understand.
Absolutely,
far more.
And that's why I'm writing the book. I mean, I've got 40 years of watching this shit, and it's just like, it's just piling up, and I'm just so disgusted. I mean, they blew away Kennedy. I mean, the CIA blew away Kennedy because Dulles, was pissed off that he fired him after the Bay of Pigs, where he tried to bag him there. I mean, there's just so many, the more I mean, it's, just like going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. You want to go down the government corruption rabbit hole? Holy fucking shit. You start listening to Whitney Webb? I mean, oh my God. It's unbelievable what our government has done in our name. And I've been around to see it. I mean, here's a perfect example. I mean, everyone talks about how bad World War II was, how many people were killed, all this stuff. You realize that in Vietnam, Walker, we killed 3 million Vietnamese citizens. I mean, and most of them were just fucking rice farmers. I mean, okay, so think about it. Our federal government killed 3 million Vietnamese. Those were lives. Those were actual human lives, right? And I remember very clearly because I was a teenager. I mean, Nixon was like, he's trying to win the election and he decided, we're going to carpet bomb North Vietnam with B-52s. I mean, what the fuck? What the fuck? I mean, that was our government doing that. And, why did that happen? Well, the guys making the B-52s and the bombs, they made a lot of money. Right? I mean, and it's just sick. And, we got to fix it. These people cannot fail fast enough. And, therefore the podcast, therefore the book, therefore the movement, all of it. I mean, I'm fed up. And, to me, it's a mission. It's absolutely a mission to spread the word and, get people off so that, we're marching on the Eccles building down in D.C., to end the goddamn Federal Reserve. I mean, it's beyond the pale. And by the way, these people know that what they're doing is wrong. They absolutely know it. They know that what they're doing is wrong, but they can get away with it because nobody's calling them on it. That's the beauty of the internet, right? And that's the beauty of books, and that's the beauty of passing knowledge around. All we got to do, we outnumber them enormously. The 1%, they're literally 1%. The other 99%, we got in terms of numbers, we got them beat, hands down. Now, they got their hands on all the levers of control, but we're taking that away too because they say, well, we can tax you, we can grab your Bitcoin, we can do that. Yeah, Mullah Bay, you motherfuckers. I've got 12 words. You can't take my money. Seriously. It's like, that's the beauty of this system. We finally got a weapon that allows us to actually destroy their system, by the way, it needs to be destroyed. It really does. So you wanted to rant. It's like, wind me up, man. You got me going.
There we go. Well, no, and you can keep winding it. Absolutely.
No, I better back it off, or I'm going to see some 3-letter agencies at my door.
We're all on lists already. Let's be honest. That's a fact. That's a fact. Well, there's a lot to touch on there. Maybe one of the things is just talking about, because you mentioned Kennedy and we were talking about RFK earlier. One of the things I heard RFK bring up in a slightly smaller setting was he brought up Executive Order 11110. Did I say 4 1? Yeah, 4 ones and a 0.
Yeah, the silver
one, which I'd never heard a politician bring up before. And I'd been researching it for a while because of Carla's dad, who escaped communism and pays attention to government overreach, had told me, why don't you look this up? And started going down that rabbit hole a bit and seeing that a lot of conspiracy theorists, quote, quote, think that maybe that's also one of the reasons that, Kennedy needed to go, because you can't take power away from the Fed and give it to the Treasury. I was curious if you had any thoughts on that, but then I'll stop there for a second and just, do you think that's something that there is ever the possibility of getting floated again, taking away some of the power of the Fed to have because they are a cartel, right? They have, it's a private bank cartel. Yes, I know that they're, quote, public and private, but we all know that that's BS, right? So is there any situation in which the Fed ends up having some of their power taken away? It doesn't seem that Trump's keen on that. Kamala, I don't think even knows what's going on there. Maybe Kennedy would.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a fabulous question. So look, the Fed was established by Congress. The Fed could be abolished by Congress. Ron Paul or, anyone could introduce a bill and say, we're going to shut the Federal Reserve down. And again, in the book I'm writing, I talk about that as one of the solutions. Literally, we should just close the Federal Reserve. There should be no Federal Reserve. And banks, the Federal Reserve was established to be a cartel for the banks and to provide banks with a backstop. We should take it away. And so basically, if a bank wants to do fractional reserve lending, get out over their skis and blow up, well, the depositors should lose all their money. And so, banks should be responsible. They should balance deposits against demand for loans. But back to the Kennedy thing, I'll touch on that briefly. I think that silver thing was a piece of it. I've read it. I've read more than you could possibly read about the Kennedy thing, and I've read some books that weren't even published that were kind of pretty dark web sort of stuff. And of course, I know the government did it. And there were a multitude of reasons. The silver thing was clearly a piece of it. I think the bigger, and they really tried to justify themselves in lots of ways if you read this stuff carefully. I think the biggest piece was the military-industrial complex wanted to have a nice war in Vietnam, and he didn't want that. He was going to try and wind it down. So to me, that was the biggest issue. But I mean, they did other things that were related issues. As you know, Kennedy was a philanderer. It was one of his weaknesses, and he had an affair with a Russian agent unknowingly. Yeah, and so I think one of the ways they justified it, I mean, here are men talking about killing the president of the United States, and I think in their minds, one of the ways I'm sure they justified it was they said, well, look, this guy's a national threat. Because look at him, he's screwing anything that moves, and he had an affair with a Russian agent. So that was another reason behind why Kennedy got killed. Yeah, it's I don't know. I kind of got off on a tangent there, but what was the rest of your question on that?
Well, I guess just, is there anything that ends up taking away the Federal Reserve's power?
Back to the Fed.
Yeah.
Well, look, what will ultimately take away the Fed's power is hyperinflation. And sadly, unless we get a lot smarter, and maybe we will, I mean, maybe, I think if you got an RFK in there and you got a Judy Shelton on the board of the Federal Reserve and you got, guys like me and other, sound money people, James Grant and others talking to the right people, we could talk about how to fairly do a monetary reset to go back to a sound money solution. But honestly, I don't see a big movement for that now, and I think inflation is going to have to get a lot worse before that happens, but it could happen. I think the more likely case, sadly, is inflation, and then big inflation, and then ultimately hyperinflation. And at that point in time, I mean, it's pretty easy. If we have hyperinflation, it's pretty easy to know how that happened, and that was the Federal Reserve. And at that point in time, I think a lot of questions are going to get thrown on the table, and there's going to be a batch of politicians who just say, gosh, you ruined the currency. You can't create another fiat currency. We need to have a currency that's tied to gold or Bitcoin or both, or some basket of commodities. I think the obvious and correct solution will be Bitcoin. I think that's what the market will choose, and maybe the market will be, the decider in the end. It won't even be a political decision. I mean, everyone will just be transacting in Bitcoin.